Today's episode of The Watch is brought to you by Hulu's The Looming Tower. Based on the Pulitzer Prize-winning book by Lawrence Wright, this limited series traces the rising threat of Osama bin Laden and how the rivalry between the FBI and CIA may have set a path for the tragedy of 9/11. The Looming Tower is available now only on Hulu. Today's episode of The Watch is also brought to you by Barry, Lights, Camera, Assassin, from executive producers Bill Hader and Silicon Valley's Alec Berg. The new HBO comedy Barry centers on a depressed hitman who discovers a new passion for acting while on a job in Los Angeles. Hader stars as Barry as he struggles to balance the responsibilities of the life he has with the pursuit of his dreams, hilariously misfiring along the way. The series also stars Henry Winkler, Stephen Root, and Sarah Goldberg. New episodes of Barry premiere every Sunday at 10:30 p.m. on HBO.
I need support staff to clear the room.
Stand up and walk, now.
Hello and welcome to The Watch. My name is Chris Ryan. I'm an editor at TheRinger.com, and joining me in the studio, he just got done doing Dexter's monologue from True Romance. It's Andy Greenwald!
I thought you were going to do he just got a Czechoslovakian unregulated drug injected into his nether parts.
Into his Netherlands?
I just feel like I hope people watched either Barry or Trust.
That's always the fun part about those intros is you never know. You never know. Andy, It's Monday. It's The Watch. We got a lot of TV to talk about today. Barry, Trust.
Yeah, and then...
It's Billions Island Day for CR.
It's not an island. It's a continent at this point.
That's the truth, man. It's a flotilla of content at The Ringer.
Dude.
We've got the Recapables with Bill Simmons and Mallory Rubin. We've got all manner of written blog posts.
Yeah.
And then today, joining us on the second half of the podcast, Mike Wags Wagner. In the real life, David Costabile. David is also... He's your favorite actor's favorite actor, man.
Yeah.
He's in everything. He's in Lincoln. He's in The Wire. He's in Breaking Bad.
Yeah,
man.
man.
He is the iconic character from Billions. He is by far my favorite part of the show.
I'm so happy he was on the show. I was not there.
Yeah.
Because I think we agreed that had I been there, we would have primarily talked about the bodegas on 7th Avenue in Park Slope, where he's been known to roam.
Do they still have bodegas in Park Slope?
I mean, most of them are Dwayne Reed's now, but yeah, a couple. And I don't know if people know this, but...
He is the mayor.
Park Slope is character actor central because every day hopping off the F train, I would see Costabile. I would see Corey Stoll.
Yeah.
I would see Steve Buscemi. I mean, like, that's the spot. They just get there and talk about how they're just going to...
It's like the entire cast of The Death of Stalin is right
disappear into their roles.
So we've got Dave Costabile to talk Billions in the second half of the show. We're going to spend the first half of the show talking about Barry and Trust. Barry, the new show on HBO, kind of the brainchild of Bill Hader.
Totally.
And I definitely felt, especially in the pilot, which I think is definitely something, like with pilots, they're like first albums. And sometimes and sometimes they feel a little overwrought, but this was one of those pilots that you could tell Bill Hader had been thinking about for a long time. I think he actually shot this quite a while ago.
Well, in typical HBO fashion, their development pipeline is so slow that I think he first started to generate the idea
like 14?
In 14, 15, yeah, with Alec Berg, who has a great resume, but more recently is the co-showrunner of Silicon Valley.
Right.
They shot the pilot, I think, in early 16, shot the series in 17, and it finally premiered in 18.
And it has the feel of something that's been really, really thought out. Not only is the world really well developed in a very subtle way. I mean, it's sense of place in terms of that North Hollywood vibe that the character mostly resides in is really excellent, but also tonally, which is probably the hardest thing to find in a pilot.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So to give a little bit of background, basically, this is about an ex-soldier who has gotten back from Afghanistan and becomes a hitman working for one of his father's friends. And he seems to
Which, by the way, is also in Collateral.
Yes, right.
Literally a hit person from the army working for one of her father's friends.
And frankly, there's a couple of beats in here where, this show does remind me a little bit of Grosse Pointe Blank.
Sure.
Which was a pretty, I think, important movie in our high school days. John Cusack, Minnie Driver.
High school or college? Anyway,
I think it was
the
like
90s.
96, something like that, 97 maybe.
Is that when you were in high school, Chris?
I was taking
nice try.
some continuing education courses
Sure, that was
in
your
high school.
Malia Obama gap years.
That's right. But
He's literally Benjamin Buttoning as we do this podcast.
why don't you tell me a little bit about how you felt about the pilot?
I think you got it right when you talked about the tone. This is an incredibly difficult tone to get right because I think it was clearly important. It's on the screen that it was important to Bill Hader to get the balance of actual hitman and violent stuff right in relationship to the comedy. He's talked about this on various podcasts, including Bill Simmons' podcast, Live from Austin. The pilot does a pretty good job balancing it and giving us the world that he wants the show to reside in. I've watched a little bit ahead. I've watched the second episode, and it's one of those things that I think is a little bit familiar from some other HBO comedies, and maybe this is reflective of their development process. The second episode, the seams showed a little more, but I wanted to keep going. Mm-hmm. And I think that speaks to a potentially good to great show where there are enough pieces there and enough of a world that has been considered that I want to stay in it, even though I'm not entirely sure about it on an episode-to-episode basis yet. The pilot, I mean, Hader is such a fascinating character. Well, Barry's the character. Hader himself as a performer is fascinating. I would put him in either in or just outside the top 5 of all-time SNL cast members.
Yeah, and the SNL thing is interesting because in SNL, you're on screen for the most 5 minutes at a time.
Yeah.
And often, Hader's characters, whether it was like Vincent Price or Stefan or whoever he was doing at any given time, were these really, either incredible impressions or really, really memorable characters. And in some ways, one of the most impressive things about Barry is the way in which he recedes into a role.
Exactly.
So I actually was almost surprised by how good he was since he wasn't that funny. And there's other funny things happening. Henry Winkler is just obviously like
he's great.
Off and running as soon as this show starts as an acting coach. But Hader, you're like, oh, is this guy been in like action movies and in thrillers for the last 20 years? It's really like he is at home in the material.
Have you seen The Skeleton Twins?
I have, yes.
So and he's talked about this in the press that may have been the more important role.
Because that's what HBO saw to be like, yeah, you can do this.
Yeah, because, you think about the life cycle of SNL cast members, for the most part, they are either the biggest personalities go on to trade on that giant personality, a la Will Ferrell, or there are the traditional glue guys, like your Phil Hartman, who, found a role that suited one aspect of his personality and allowed the other craziness to go around him on news radio, for example.
Yeah.
Hader was really fascinating because he was incandescent, but incandescent in character. It wasn't so much that you were excited about Bill Hader, you were excited about Bill Hader's impression or performance in. He is a glue guy who is also, underneath it all, a very good actor.
Right.
So it's the right choice for him, I think, because he can play that sort of low bass note in his own show. I think that they make a number of smart choices with the casting, as you said in The World. I think my only red flags going forward are, one, the tone, because it's a comedy. It wants to be a comedy. And there are things like the Chechens, for example, the bald guy, who, it's a great performance.
Yeah.
He's not done on the show. I hope that's not a spoiler. And as he goes forward, it's a broader choice and a broader performance. And sometimes I think that clashes as they're starting to figure it out going forward. The other thing is just, actors making shows about actors. It's kind of like when David Simon was making season 5 of The Wire about journalism.
Season 5 of The Wire has come up a lot recently.
Yeah, it's not a red flag. It's a tiny red handkerchief for me when people celebrate the quirks.
A red pocket square.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Something classy.
Yeah.
When people make shows about worlds that they are particularly, I mean, you should write what you know, but when you're like, it's sort of like telling someone about your dream. When you find, of course, people who have been in improv groups or in acting classes find the quirks of acting classes incredibly funny and fascinating.
Yeah.
Acting as a profession in general, probably like journalism too, that is prone to navel gazing. So while I liked the acting class in the beginning, I have some questions about its long-term viability, just as something that is going to entertain everyone and not just themselves. These are small points. It's an interesting show, and it's an ambitious show, and it's worth pursuing. I mean, HBO hasn't launched have they launched a big comedy in a minute? I started to say it, then I started to walk it back.
I guess Insecure would be, if you call Insecure a comedy.
Insecure was their last big half-hour. I mean, I'm sorry, divorce heads. You keep up with S2 of that show? How'd you do with that?
I haven't really tapped in yet.
I noticed.
I got 3 episodes into S1 of divorce.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and that
because,
was it.
Oh, I'm sorry, because you had the cape on for that show after one episode.
No, all
Yes.
I said was it wasn't as bad as you said it was.
That's-
You were like, this is about like how America has like a deep ulcer in the center.
Yeah.
And I was like, chill out.
I don't think that's fair. I didn't say it's about that. I said it's proof that it does.
I'm glad we're talking about the HBO universe a little bit because I do have one note. And
Okay.
this pains me because I'm not in control of this. You know what I mean? And I know everybody has to work to eat. But I need us all
Yeah.
to have a quorum, and we need to decide as a group how many shows Glenn Fleshler can be in.
Totally.
Because look, that dude is really cool.
He's working.
He is routinely in the shows that I like.
You want to list some of them?
Let's just talk about Glenn Fleshler. You may remember him from Shmuel in Sex and the City back in '98, right?
You may.
Popped up for 2 episodes on Third Watch, a couple episodes of Law and Order Special Victims Unit.
By the way, this episode of The Watch brought to you by imdb.com.
Now it pops up as Milton Trammell in Damages, which is where I think I first noticed him. Okay, a little bit of Good Wife, a little bit of Boardwalk Empire. Goes pro in 14
Yeah.
with True Detective season 1.
Goes pro. I liked him on Boardwalk Empire, actually.
Yeah, and then since his 2014 on True Detective, he's been in The Nick. He's been in The Following.
Oh, he's good on The Nick.
He's been in Hannibal. He's been on Billions. He plays Axe's lawyer on Billions. And then he did this run where he was the judge in Night Of. He's on Barry, and he was the head FBI agent in Waco. So I feel like I'm watching 3 shows right now that Fleshler's got a role in.
By the way, you basically just confirmed to me that he lives in Park Slope. They have a co-op open for him.
He sublets Costabile's apartment.
I think he must
Yeah.
when he's filming. I mean, these are Barry.
Do you
isn't,
think
but a
that
lot of
there
these are
should
New
be a
York
limit
shows.
on how many shows any one actor can be on at any given time for the sake of suspension of disbelief?
I think this is what Congress just argued in regards to minor league baseball players. They're like, the Fairness of America's Pastime Act is you can't get paid more than like a barrel of Cracker Jack and $10 an hour.
That's good.
I'm going to say no.
Okay.
There shouldn't be a federally mandated law against actors working. Are you having trouble? This seems like more like a cry for help from you. You can't keep track
well,
of
it
the
doesn't.
Fleshlerverse.
It's not cool if the Chechen mobster is also an FBI agent in Waco,
Well, what about...
and then he's also Bobby Axelrod's lawyer in Billions at the same time.
I'm going to suggest a different way for you to look at it. I think you should steer into this mental skid of yours. I think you should embrace it.
Okay.
You know,
So you want me to come up with a central unifying theory of how Glenn Fleshler?
No, I'm
ties
saying he's
together the
only ever
universe?
playing one part. Richard Belzer played Detective John
Oh,
Munch
that's good.
across 9 television
Okay.
shows, thus establishing.
So you think he's still Errol Childress in all of these shows?
You choose the role,
Okay.
but he is. Because what I'm saying is that that proved definitively that 30 Rock existed in the same universe as Homicide: Life on the Street.
Right.
So you do this.
Well, who had the tweet the other day about whether or not, because if there is, somebody had something where it was like, if what are those meme exists within the Black Panther universe, does that mean that the memes from our reality exist in MCU?
So, okay. So are there any MCU dependent memes that are thus rendered like you need you need the cosmic cube to
But
understand
that wouldn't
that?
actually be wrong because the people in MCU are theoretically famous,
Right?
but there is no.
Oh, so there would be meme. Oh, I see what you're saying. So there would be Thor
there's
memes
no Sokovia
in
here.
the MC. Wait, what? Well, yeah, because Ultron fucking lifted it out of the earth and threw it back down again.
I'm
There's
just
no
saying that there's
Sokovia
like,
anywhere.
we have to, maybe Fleshler is the key to all
Maybe
of
he
it.
can explain
He's
this.
the last Infinity Stone.
Last point on Barry before we venture too off of the reservation.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I'm optimistic about the show, not just the good performances and Bill Hader and Alec Berg and the pedigree of it, it's nice to see a comedy that is trying to thread this needle.
Yeah.
The show, one of the things that is in its favor, you'll see audience as it moves forward, is that it's serialized. It's very much like cliffhanger into the next thing, which is better choice, I think, than he's just hanging out in LA and a new mission comes up. It's all connected because of course it would be. I like that it is. We live in a world where a show about a Bill Hader character stumbling into an acting class in North Hollywood could get a 2-season order at Netflix.
Yeah.
Minus the Hitman component.
Yeah.
So while the Hitman thing, whether your mileage may vary on it, I like that they are trying something ambitious with a serialized action dramatic element in a half-hour 2018 comedy. So we'll see. We'll revisit.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the other show that debuted last night.
Yeah.
Trust, which is FX's miniseries. What a time to be a Getty, you know?
Sort of.
Well, it's always a good time to be a Getty, I think, because you're just caked.
Well, as we've learned, there are ups and downs to being a Getty.
I guess
think
so. That's probably pretty true. So this covers familiar territory because it's covering the same...
If there were two projects in 2019 based on the Ryan family legacy, would you be like, what a great time for me and my family? Because there's a TV show and a movie about these ill things that happen to my family?
I guess so. I can't really speak to like what the Getty fortune is at right now.
What would be the inciting incident of the Ryan family story that would be like the Getty grandson and heir being kidnapped by Italian coke lords? Like, what is the just slightly skewed art museum Philadelphia version of this?
I don't know. Is it the time like I got my cleats stolen in baseball practice?
Well, you tell me, screenwriter.
Yeah, Fairmount Sports Association still owes me $45 for those.
Wait, what's that? FX just gave that a 3-season order.
Exactly. Danny
Amazing.
Boyle. So Trust has one of those strange development situations where it was probably the crown jewel of what FX was going to roll out alongside Atlanta for this season.
They're excited,
for this time period. And I never quite understand how when you have like such a niche story, two suitable, really wise companies will be like, I don't care, let's just push forward with it. Like, I guess it's just a matter of nobody blinking.
It's just Deep Impact and Armageddon.
But this is the same. It's the same movie as All the Money. It's the same story as All the Money in the World, which didn't do very well, but did garner some Oscar nominations.
Yes, and the movie version famously replaced Kevin Spacey at the last minute with Christopher Plummer. The TV version famously replaced Kevin Spacey with Donald Sutherland. So Spacey got cut out of... Am I correct about that?
I think you got that wrong.
Okay.
It stars Donald Sutherland, Brendan Fraser, and in later episodes, Hilary Swank. This felt like, when they say that they don't make movies like they did in the 90s, this felt like very 90s to me.
As a movie or a TV show?
As a movie. As a TV show. I mean, like...
It reminded you of a 90s movie or a 90s
Yeah, it
TV
had
show?
a kind of... Danny Boyle directed all these episodes, and it had a feel of...
Did he direct all of them? I wasn't sure
I'm
about
not
that.
sure if he actually did, but I'm pretty sure he did.
I want to know, because that's going to... My opinion about the show may change as we move on. I'm going to look it up while you talk.
But it has a certain dark sense of humor, a visual sight gag sense of humor, and an acidity that I associate with a couple of, like... lesser known 90s kind of caper movies. Like
are you doing 2 Days in a Valley again?
No, I was thinking more like A Simple Plan, like the John Cusack, Billy Bob Thornton movie.
I really like that movie.
And I think that was Scott Frank, wasn't it?
That was
or Scott Burns.
Yeah, but it was Sam Raimi directed that.
Right. Exactly. That kind of like slightly more pop version of Coen Brothers vibe. And Danny Boyle trucked in that in the 90s, you know, like after Trainspotting, like he was...
A Life Less Ordinary
Life Less
kind of
Ordinary,
thing?
yeah. And interestingly enough, the person who wrote Trust is Simon Beaufoy. And you can say that there are almost 3 Danny Boyles. There's John Hodge Danny Boyle, which is this really, really, really dark, not a very high opinion of humanity kind of storytelling.
Yeah.
That's Trainspotting, that's A Shallow Grave. Then there's Alex Garland Danny Boyle, which is Sunshine and the Beach. And
28 Days Later.
28 Days Later. And that has an almost spiritual element to it, and it usually has a lot of twists. And then there's Simon Beaufoy's Danny Boyle, and that's 127 Hours and Slumdog and Trust. Historically rooted.
A little bit more...
Somewhat more about the triumph of the human spirit.
More open-hearted and
I'll be curious to see
yes.
where the triumph comes out of this story, because for the most part, it's about disgusting rich people, and their harems.
They have harems, yeah. First of all, I just need to know, I think the biggest question all of us have, how do you feel at this stage of your life about retaining the services of an erudite gentleman to read you softcore
That's my
literary
favorite part.
porn?
Von Blanc?
Just to get you...
Yeah.
Okay. I did a little research live on air. Danny Boyle directed at least the first 3.
Okay.
Which is great news. I was not looking forward to watching this show. I felt not only was it a little bit, it's strange, much like that OJ thing a few years ago, where actually both projects ended up succeeding on their own merits. A little bit fatigued at the thought of the same type of story again. But more than that, after this run of history karaoke, that we've been lambasting on the podcast, from the Looming Tower to Waco, shows that sort of seem to be just mining
They're movies of the week.
Yeah, they're mining the IP of IRL for. Ooh. I'm off the dome today. For an easy access to viewers, basically. You don't. There's no onboarding needed, like we were talking about with a pilot usually, because at least the broad strokes of history are either well known or easily Googleable. So I sat down with zero expectations, and I got to tell you, I really enjoyed it.
I mean, it's really well done.
It's really well done. Now, just to provide a counterpoint, my wife didn't like it because, for the reasons you said, she just had no interest in seeing disgusting rich people behave in disgusting ways. Right. That's fair. What I really appreciated about it was something you alluded to a moment ago, which is it's pretty funny and it's pretty cockeyed and like a little bit to the side of the story it's telling. Danny Boyle directs the hell out of it. And to your point about there being multiple Danny Boyles,
it looks like it costs $1 billion. I mean,
I agree.
The depth in which they recreate the Getty
Sutton Place is the mansion
Sutton Place,
in England.
And all the sort of just absolutely almost garish amounts of wealth that he has accumulated, and all the art that he's been buying, and from he's raiding the National Museum for
antiquities.
Yeah, for antiquities.
There is a element to the direction that reminded me of something that we loved about The Knick, which is where the curiosity of the director outpaces the curiosity of the script. And I'll praise the script in other places for sure, but we would talk about how in The Knick, when the scene would be boilerplate or exposition or purely expository, Steven Soderbergh would take his camera and spin it around the room, and all of a sudden the world would be bigger.
And stuff. Yeah,
there are moments in this when, contrary to some criticism of Danny Boyle and some of his other movies, that he seems sort of ADD, that he just moves the camera to move the camera. There are these visual little jolts of electricity, many of which involve bird slaughter, because a goose gets got, and then there's a lot of plucking at one point too. That is not, to my mind, it was not too on the nose about captive animals or nature being trampled. It was just surprising to keep you. It was off kilter. There were moments in it where I was a little bit lost because there are a lot of people that kind of look alike who all have the same grievances against Donald Sutherland. But I thought there were some nice grace notes that, again, elevated what could have been boilerplate aspects of a script meant to humanize someone, because there aren't that many human characters so far. Notably, the cook, who introduces herself as Cook. By the way, you should just be like, hey, I'm podcasting. or whatever. But also the scene with the butler at the finale, near the end of the episode,
Bullimore,
is really interesting, well played.
Yes.
And Sutherland, one of our great actors, struggling sometimes with what I believe to be some pretty blocky or British phrasing. There's a scene where he's very angry, and then the leader of his harem says, "You're grieving." That all the dialogue, all his monologue in that speech that he gives, it just didn't make sense coming out of his mouth.
Yeah, it's a little on the nose. They open it up as like with King Lear as a framing device for the entire show, and I think that is a bit on the nose. But this is an interesting conversation that we can have as we go through the season a little bit, because I think I'm going to stick with it. I don't know.
I got to tell you, I just enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I did the thing that I do that I can now say honestly, because people know this. When I fired it up, I was like, it's going to be 57. It's going to be 57.
It was like 108.
And it was 102, 104. And I was like, oh, God. Didn't notice. Didn't second screen it, guys.
And also, I think that it's an interesting episode because it's largely a character study of Getty, of Sutherland.
Yes.
They spend a lot of time with him doing things to himself.
Many sexual things.
Yeah. And also just getting into his psychology. And I think future episodes each have like a very different
I would imagine
setup and vibe. So by all accounts, the next episode is the Brendan Fraser episode, and it's got a real energy that the first one doesn't. I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, we didn't go ahead on this one.
I think that this is an interesting case of how this is going to play over week to week, because when you watch this, if you were to watch 3 of these, although that would be like 4 hours of your life, if you were to watch 3 of these, you might have a different opinion about how it than if it was going out piecemeal like it is.
Yeah, I agree. The Brendan Fraser renaissance was not something I was necessarily expecting or checking for.
Yeah.
It started with our friend Zach Barron wrote an absolutely terrific profile of him in GQ that I recommend everyone checking out. Really humanizes him. He's an actor I never really thought much about.
Yeah.
Generationally, he wasn't my George of the Jungle. Every generation gets the one they deserve. But I didn't really see the Mummy movies. I didn't quite get it. When he shows up very briefly in this premiere,
yeah.
I imagine that has some impact for people who used to see him in one role and hadn't seen him in a while, just because he looks older and bigger.
Sure.
And again, by all accounts, he's quite good going forward. For me, it was a moment. It was almost a Glenn Fleshler-esque moment in that it took me out of it. But where do you stand on him?
I mean, I can't wait to see these future episodes. I mean, there's a real, he has a certain gravity now that I don't think that we knew that he had. And so It's really exciting to see. I mean, my experience with him is largely Encino Man and stuff like that.
Just the last thing, if you were on the fence about Trust, guys, if you watched it, I would just say maybe the rest of the season doesn't live up to this, but the way the episode ended with young Paul
yes,
tripping in all senses through the streets of Rome, and then having that interaction with the beautiful woman asking to kiss her, and then basically bowing at a 2,000-year-old fountain, putting the hood on his own head, was so. That's what I like in TV, man. Not those specifics, although they're pretty good, but that's the moment when the show to me kind of elevated.
Yeah,
and it was odd, and it was surprising.
I felt the same way about when the payoff for the Teresa invitation happens, and the way that the different girlfriends react, and I really love the Penelope character. I'm really excited to keep watching.
I'm really surprised. We should not have
Anna
doubted.
Chancellor is the person who played Penelope. Yeah.
We should not have doubted that FX would be coming at this a little bit sideways. That they wouldn't just be doing movie of the week.
It's good. It reminds me a little bit of the feeling that I had when Fargo first started, where I'm like, this is different. This feels different.
And I believe, and we can talk about this as we go forward, there is a plan for this to continue for 3 or 4 seasons. I think about different rich families. I don't know. Not the Gettys.
I had no idea.
But yeah, the reason why this is called
the Ryans.
This is. I'm setting you up here. They just called Trust : Ragnarok.
Yeah.
Or I'm sorry, I don't remember the full title, but it is. Yeah, there's something
the
anthology.
Assassination of Chris Ryan's Little League career.
Okay. You did that to yourself.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors, and we will be talking with Dave Costabile from Billions. Today's episode of The Watch is brought to you by Microsoft Teams, your hub for teamwork in Office 365 with so much to look after. Wouldn't it be great if there was just one place to look? Teams is that single workspace where you can work, share, and connect with the people in your work life. Teams brings together your chats, meetings, files, and apps all in one place. Take teamwork where you work with apps for mobile and desktop. So whether you're sprinting towards a deadline or sharing your next big idea, Teams can help you and your team achieve even more. Microsoft Teams and Office 365. Visit office.com/teams to learn more. Today's episode of The Watch is brought to you by the homies at Hotel Tonight. Again, I cannot tell you how much I've been loving Hotel Tonight. Hotel Tonight helps you book amazing deals at great hotels, and even though the name's Hotel Tonight, you can actually book up to 100 days in advance in top destinations and up to a week in advance everywhere else. They work with cool, top-rated hotels and don't feature those long, endless lists of options you have to scroll through. Instead, they show you a select list of the best deals at the best hotels at any given time. So start scoring amazing deals at incredible hotels. Download the Hotel Tonight app now. I'm so excited to be joined by David Costabile, Wags from Billions.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, I think if we had to look at the data, the most beloved fictional character at The Ringer by a long shot. I actually think, yeah. I mean,
Really?
it was a slow burn, but sometime around mid-season 1 and definitely throughout season 2, you became something of an icon for our staff. So this is actually a pretty big deal for us.
Nice. I love it.
I was listening.
Season 3 is going to really fuck you up because the show is growing and it's getting better, and there is a solidity to how and where Wags fits.
Does it translate? When you say this, there's a solidity to what you're doing, the show is growing, does that translate up behind the camera or in production?
Yeah.
Do you feel that when you guys all know what you're doing? How does that work out?
It's one of those things where the writers and the way that we're just telling the story is it's just gelling. And in the beginning, and this is true for most shows, with that you just are trying to find the exact voice.
Yeah.
And the genre that they're somebody we were talking about it last night, and somebody was saying that it was Elvis Mitchell who was saying it's like a screwball drama, and that is a particularly weird and odd world.
Yeah.
Like, how do you get it just in the right pocket? And it's like music. You find that once you get in the pocket, you get in the pocket and you're just in it. And the writers have done that. And now as it's sometimes like, I think even in the second season, you had to wait until you saw it. And then you're like, oh, I see. With the music and all of the pieces together, that I get it. Like this is a solid, clear, we're all telling the same story. But now while we're doing it in season 3, you really feel like, oh no, while you're doing it, you're like,
yeah, the first episode, and this is going to go up Monday, so people have seen the first episode of season 3. And I felt like, you know, it's interesting. I was watching another show that was just starting its second season. It was actually Sneaky Pete, which I really enjoy Sneaky Pete. But it was clear that they had like a lot of plot they had to get through, and it was the way that they started their second season in comparison to say what you guys are doing in 3, where I just feel like you guys are right out of the blocks so fast, where it's just like, you know what Billions is, right? But at this point, there's so many reference points that are thrown around in the dialogue, and you guys get to have a lot of fun, probably. And I was wondering whether or not you guys get any input with that, but
it's pretty rare.
It's just Brian and David.
Yeah,
just
it's pretty much
say
Brian
the
and
Goodfellas
David.
line the way I tell you.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah. But when you guys are on set or you're thinking about your performances, do you gauge your performance in terms of reference points? Like, I feel like I'm trying to do something that wouldn't be out of place in, say, like The Firm in the 90s, or what's the vibe?
I mean,
we're
you definitely
going through?
do talk about that. You know, those guys love movies, and they love being able to play with the characters moving in and out of, you know, not being in those worlds, but feeling like they can reference them with great ease and sort of slip into it and slip out of it. And you know, that is fun, and it's sort of for people who are giant movie buffs, it's sort of like a fun Easter egg, and you're just like, oh yeah, I know that reference. But also, those guys just think in those terms. They really love those movies, and that the dialogue isn't driven by that, but it is. It's sort of like it's like a parallel course. They're they're just in 2 lanes that are going forward.
I think that one of my favorite parts of the the premiere of the 3rd season is when you talk to Asia about the Top Gun reference.
Yeah.
And it's like, we all know that not only is it showing up in the show, but the characters in the show know it's showing up in the show. It's a great moment. You know, I just found out because I was listening to Brian is on Bill Simmons' pod on Friday, and I didn't know that you guys went to school together.
Yeah, we went to college together.
So were you guys friends from first day freshman year? When did you meet him?
No, I mean, you know, he was the BMOC on campus because he had discovered, while we were there, he discovered Tracy Chapman, and then he was her manager and produced her first album.
So you guys at NYU? Where were you guys?
No, at Tufts.
At Tufts, okay.
And then I went back, and then after school, I had gone to NYU for my graduate degree.
Okay.
So I knew him. I think we had taken one class together, but you would sort of see him on campus and be like, "Oh, that guy. He's the one." But then, and we weren't really, you know, we were friendly, but we weren't real friends, and we didn't maintain until Brian had always sort of said that he felt like if he had watched my career and sort of watched what I was doing over time, and felt for him that there was justice in the world if I was able to succeed. And if I wasn't able to succeed, that I was going to be one of the barometers of being like, there is actually no justice.
There's no justice in this world.
Which is nice. I mean, I was like, wow, I don't think that's really the way it works, but it was kind. And then subsequently called me years later and was like, hey, we wrote this movie, Solitary Man, and we want you to be in it. And they were directing together. And it was great, and they're incredibly loyal friends, and it's very fun to be able to have an ongoing long dialogue with artists who are making something and trying to make something new. And they also respond to me. Like Wags was initially conceived was totally different. I was going to be a strong, silent Upper East Side WASP that is like the man behind the man that on some level, Damien's character was going to be the wild, you know.
And you would have to rein him in.
Yeah, and then I would always be there to sort of hold him back or correct the mistakes that he made.
That would have been a tragedy.
And then as we shot it, they were like, no, we've got to do the opposite. And so most of the shit that I did in the pilot was cut, and then
I was rewatching the pilot the other night.
Just really not there, clean shaven, none of the twirly mustache. So then as we were reconceiving it, they knew that inside me, because I had never been cast as that guy. No one would ever cast me as that guy.
Yeah.
And they just knew inside that I had all the rage necessary, which I do. And so it was a great release, and they were just like, go. And they stood behind me, and they just kept pushing me harder and just like, go further, go. And it was incredibly fun to it's an incredibly fun thing to do and to play. And then they write accordingly and move the character.
So you had input into Wags' development
in the very beginning, yeah. And I think that like even the mustache thing, like I had come to them and I was like, what if I have a twirly mustache? And they're like, let's see. And I did it, and they were like, yeah. And I was like, he's like a guy.
Out?
It does. You do have to definitely pull on it for a while. It's definitely.
Showtime should sell Wags
mustache
pomade or something. Why not?
Nice.
You got to get points on that.
Come on, Showtime, figure it out. I mean, they're willing to sell lots of other Wags.
They've got the cutout,
They got the cutout. They got the T-shirt. You have a T-shirt for yourself?
Oh
what
my
would
gosh.
Wags do T-shirt? You guys are behind. I don't know what's happening.
We got to get the
there.
merch in here.
You got to get that merch.
Is there a Wags moment that you get stopped on the street, or what's the sort of highest?
I think the sushi thing that responds to a lot of people.
And
respond to that.
Has it ever happened at a sushi restaurant?
That I've done that? That I've been that someone did that to me, or somebody did? No, I've never experienced that.
Okay, because it feels like at this point
Maybe
now
I should go to more sushi restaurants.
you gotta go to Sugarfish. Just go up the street and
Delicious.
just say, "Hey,
Yeah.
I'm here."
Yeah.
Because I was wondering now at this point, especially after the second season, that you get such a huge amount of home run lines and home run parts. Like, is there a point where you actually ever say to them, like, we should probably no
way.
There's never
I
any.
want it all.
You don't want to hit the brakes at all.
No way.
Okay.
Why
So what
would
is a
you?
character?
What's the fun of that?
No,
Who wants to see that?
No, I don't.
It's like people that they want to see him break good. You're like, fuck that. No way. You just want to see that. Like, and if that guy ever, like at the end where he turns into a nice guy, oh my god.
That's the thing is because I think that the aside from the lines, the mustache, everything, the thing I like so much about Wags is that he's kind of like this Virgil character who is guiding other characters through hell. You get to go to all the cool places.
Yeah.
You get to go to the Turkish baths in the beginning of the third season. And it makes it that much more of a New York show because you just feel like you're out and about. And you live in New York?
I do, yeah.
So is this a side of New York that you've never seen, that you kind of knew some of those places?
Yeah, when you get to some of those high-flying spots, you're like, I have never had the entrance card to this. So this is the golden ticket where you really get to go into the bowels of New York and see some really awesome shit.
Yeah.
And it's really, I mean, I am not a multimillionaire, so, or 100 millionaire as Wags is, but it's when you get to go and hang out at some of these places, it's just really exquisite. Like, Wags lives at the Pierre Hotel. The Pierre Hotel's really lovely. And then when we were shooting on the 32nd floor of Wags's house, Wags's apartment, it was awesome.
Did you ask if you could like stay over for research
I kind of
purposes?
wanted to.
Yeah.
I wanted to be like, what if Wags stays here tonight?
What if Wags
and by
doesn't leave
Wags,
the
I
hotel?
mean me.
I read an interview you did about Breaking Bad, actually, with Time, I think, and you were talking about how when you arrived at Gale's apartment on the set for Gale's apartment, that there were details in the production design that unlocked the character for you. And I know we were joking about the mustache, but as the Wags character developed throughout the writing of probably season 1, I would imagine, were there details about his character, like a small thing that I wouldn't have known about by just watching, that you were like, that's this guy?
I mean, there were things, because it was a development and because it was a real collaboration between the way that, because they had conceived it one way and then started conceiving it another, there was an opportunity for us to talk about it. So like the mustache is a great example where I was like, it is a knowing thing. He's knowingly doing this. He's like, I am. It's a strategy, right? He is strategizing about being a bad guy.
Yeah.
And it's not that he walks the line between being, being sort of drunk with this aspect of who he is.
Sometimes
but also,
literally,
but also using it to his advantage and using it knowingly to his advantage. There's that scene in the strip club where they go and he pulls a fast one on these guys, and you're like, do you really think I'm that stupid that I'm just I always said when we talk about when you reach the limit, when if someone comes up with something and you'd be like, well, I'm not a fucking animal. Like the answer is like, would you do that? And you'd be like, I'm not an animal. Are you an idiot? He is a sophisticated human being. He's an intelligent person. He's an educated person. And you want that from him. And so something like even the Pierre, where I had pitched to them, I was like, I think that he lives at the Pierre because there is, part of that backstory has not even been revealed to the audience. Like
Yeah.
when you see who his parents are, or when you see you haven't really seen any part of his family life.
Sure.
And on some level, it's better, right? You don't want to.
Right.
But when it is eventually revealed what that is and who those people are, it will also be even more like, oh my God. So I had pitched to them, he lives at the Pierre, and then David Levine was like, oh no, he had lived there between his first and his second marriage and then kept the apartment between his second and third marriage. And I was like, that's genius. It's so much more detailed and so much more than for me, that just the idea of that really begins to deepen and expand and help you detail the way you see the world, the way he goes through life, the way he encounters people, the way so even if we never had shot that scene in the Pierre, and just knowing that as it's enough just as a single detail to be like, that really expands who this person could be.
Sure. And I think that Wags with two X's is completely different than Wags who's never been able to know love.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Exactly.
I was curious because you're talking so much about this being part of this show, even, from in some ways since your college days, but you've been a part of so many excellent projects and often jumping in midstream.
Yeah.
How hard is that? How hard is it to show up on set of The Good Wife or set of The Office and you're just like, okay, like, I mean, obviously there's different levels of like your guest starring run, right? But even for something like Breaking Bad, which was up and running, and you come in and you're this subtly huge agent of change in that show. Mm-hmm. How do you find your way into the material when it's kind of like up and running like that? I
mean, that show was, I was already a fan of that show. I had watched, a good friend of mine was one of the writer-producers on that show. His name is Sam Catlin, and he's the showrunner now on Preacher.
Yeah.
So I had watched from the beginning because he was involved in it and it was incredible, and I was an enormous fan. So when I auditioned for it, the audition thing was the piece where I recite the Whitman poem to him. And it was so clear to me who that person was, and the writing is so good that on some level I was like, well, I know exactly who this person is.
Yeah.
I know exactly how he fits in here, even though I don't know what the end game of where he's going. And I think on some level they did, which they didn't tell me.
Yeah.
Until later. And then Vince came up to me and he's like, we're going to kill you. And I was like, oh, no, shit. I like this TV. I want to be on this TV show. I don't want to die. But drugs don't pay. So, or they do until they really pay. So it was, it is a cliche, but part of it because it's so true is that the writing really guided you. Mm-hmm. So it was really very easy. And once you get onto those sets, you do have to kind of figure out how it all works. Like, what's the style and what is the vibe on set? Like, how does it run? And you really have to allow yourself to be very flexible about, okay, you may have an idea about what this was or how it's going to work, and when you get there, you've got to just be like, okay, what are we going to do? How does this particular world run? And you just have to you have to really pay attention. Like, for instance, I went on The Wire. I was in the 5th season of The Wire. Yeah. And the first day we had like a 4-page scene. It was all like journalism speak. And we were shooting this long, long wide shot from miles away. And I had to do all of this stuff that I was like, could barely get it out. I was like, because it was difficult, and I didn't know the world and hadn't watched that show, which really? I was very glad I hadn't, because I would have been way too intimidated to actually speak while I was there. So then the script supervisor came up and she was like, so in the 3rd page, you changed this to that, and we're going to have to reshoot the scene. And I was like, I changed this to that, and you're miles away from me. We're all like tiny little specks on the screen, and I changed this to that. And I was like, which this and which that and which is it? And I was like, and that's how you have to learn the world. That the words that David was writing are clear, and they were just like, it is set. There is no deviation. Don't deviate. And on that level, then you learn the culture of how to be there, right?
Yeah.
that's hard if you're walking in and you're like, oh my god, which is it? Is it this or is it that? Is it this or is it that?
So were you more, so with Breaking Bad, it sounds like you were almost less nervous because you had seen the show?
No, I was more nervous that I had seen the show, but I
Bad.
was like totally cocky when I hadn't seen The Wire, and I walked in and was like, what the fuck is this? And then
serious?
I started watching The Wire as I was doing it and got like progressively more and more anxious as the season went along. I was like, oh my god, this is one of the greatest television shows ever created, and I can't believe that I'm part of it.
Is there something that is a consistent theme, whether it's Vince or David or Brian, that you're working with on these incredible projects that these showrunners or these shows have in common?
I think, I think in terms of casting, I think I've always described myself as a like side of the pot actor. Like, when you make a sauce, that the stuff that stays on the side as the water evaporates from the sauce.
Yeah.
Like if you look in the middle of the sauce, you know what you're going to get, and you're like, oh, I like that sauce. I'll have a bite of that. But then if you look on the crusty sort of side, that's sort of more concentrated and stranger, and you're like, I don't know if I like that. I'm more on the side of the pot guy.
Okay.
So if you scrape me off the side, you're going to get something unusual. I have my own sort of way of looking at the world, and I want to maintain that, and I want to bring that to what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I it's often to my own detriment. I'll get a script and I'll read it and I'm like, well, I know what they want. I'm not going to do that. Mm-hmm. And you're like, but why wouldn't you just do it?
Is there any time you remember getting a script that said that and you were like, and later on you were kicking yourself for not going?
No, because I'm just too much of an asshole. So I'm just like, I'm not gonna deviate from it. And when I have deviated from it, I've screwed myself.
Yeah.
Like you get there and you're just like, you're not happy and you don't want to do this, and because you weren't as fully authentic as you want to be. Mm-hmm. Like I am my own person, and I'm just like, I want to be that on screen as fully as I can be, because then I'm going to actually bring life to what these guys wrote. Yeah. And I think, not to pat myself on the back, but I feel like that is, if there is a common thread between those guys, they like that. They want that, and they are each one of those people also their own person, in a very distinct way, and their voice is very distinct. And I want to be able to engage with people who are as deeply authentic as they are, and they all have something to say really deeply. And I think it's
different vibes, different like.
Yeah. They're all totally
like how so.
I mean, David is an incredibly serious guy, and Vince they're all really nice people, but it's just a all totally different world.
And when you so you were kind of alluding to this, but obviously your character Gale meets his demise in one of probably the best episodes of television I've ever seen, if at least not the 21st century.
Nice.
I mean, Full Measure. The Half Measure's Full Measure run is, I would put that up against most movies, I think.
Wow, even the end, even Ozymandias, even the penultimate.
I actually have a personal preference for that end of 3, beginning of 4 run, like Box Cutter 2.
Nice.
I think that sometimes
you're really going in the deep dive with the titles.
Well, I just also Andy and I were just talking about it, but I actually think that sometimes shows become aware of their own finality towards the end, and even though Ozymandias is obviously like just phenomenal, there's something about it being in. That's like peak LeBron. That's like peak Ken Griffey Jr. or something. It's like you're watching an athlete that doesn't have an end yet.
Yeah.
So you're kind of, and when that happens, when Gale dies, it changes Jesse, it changes Walt, it changes Gus, it changes Mike. And I was wondering if you remember anything special about shooting that episode or reading that script for the first time, or knowing even if then you knew you were making something incredibly special like that.
Yeah, I mean, I loved playing that character. I loved him. I felt so connected to him emotionally, and I felt like the sacrifice that Vince that the writers were gonna do to kill someone like that is so strong. It's so costly. It costs them so much to have created something really lovely and then really brutalize your audience by taking them away, and that was you knew that was happening. Also in that episode, that's the episode where I sing for the first time. So Vince had asked Sam if I had any talent. And he was like, does he have any talent? Can he do anything? And Sam was, can he do anything? So Sam was like, yeah, well, he can sing.
What if it was like he can shoot 3-pointers?
They would have had to do that. They would have had to have been like, that's what Gale can do. He's like, well, no, but he's an incredible 3-point. He's got incredible range on the court. So they knew, so then they just gave me the tune, and they didn't know I spoke some Italian, which I do, and I am a trained singer, so I could sing the tune. And it was an incredibly complicated song, and it is brutal to learn because it's a patter song, because it was in the Neapolitan dialect, which is a very difficult dialect. We couldn't find. They had to call the embassy to get the translation of the tune. It was a song from the 40s, so there were some recordings of it. Obviously, there was the recording we sang to, and it was great. And it was just like, so you also knew that inside of this great loss that you had to do, you also had to have this great celebration, and the celebration of music and song in his life and for who he was. And that I loved the tune, and I loved how it set it up. And it's interesting because then the second tune is the one that gets more play.
Sure. Yeah.
And people forget about the first tune. I really love it.
Was it harder to do the singing or the speech in the wire the first day?
Well, the preparation, they're both very painful. Probably the singing, because it has to sort of be effort. It has to look effortless.
Yeah. All right. Well, I want to ask you a little bit more about season 3 from Billions, without giving too much away. After Wags had such a, I thought, like very tumultuous breakthrough kind of like, season 2. It does seem like, at least from the first episode, like you're going to get to do some stuff with Asia.
Yeah.
And I was curious if you could tell me a little bit about working with them and a little bit about the fun of being on a show for this long. It seems like you get to pair off with different people.
Yeah.
And that's the real fun for me when something gets to season 3 and it's like, oh yeah, let's get these two together and have them go do something. So what can we kind of generally expect from
I do.
3?
You will get some Wags in Asia, Wags and Taylor stuff, which is very fun, and it's interesting to. He doesn't really take them under his wing, but he does give them a fuller experience of the world. And in that first episode where you see he takes them to the baths,
the Eastern Promises scene.
And it's fun. So we got to do stuff like that, and I got to know Asia, and it's really they're a very interesting person, and they're a very interesting character on the show. And I think it's a really not only groundbreaking, but perfectly set for the world that we're making. And that on some level there is the proof is always in the pudding for whoever's working. Like if you bring it and you can do the job well, like you are accepted. And if you can't do the job well, you're fucked. Get the fuck out of my face. And so there is for Wags, he's just like, great, you're in charge now. Yeah. Let's fucking do it. Let's go. And
I like it because it would have been easy to be like, Wags is super suspicious of Taylor. And it's like, no, it's just like, let's rock.
What fucking fun is that?
Right.
There's no fun in that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
So you get to see there's some slight openings that both of us offer each other, and it's good.
You're smiling. I like this.
It's good.
I can't wait. All right. David Costabile, thank you so much for coming by to The Watch. Check out Billions every Sunday on Showtime.
Boom.
Today's episode of The Watch was brought to you by Barry. As a reminder, the new HBO comedy series Barry premiered on Sunday, March 25th at 10:30 from executive producers Bill Hader and Silicon Valley's Alec Berg. The new HBO comedy stars Hader as a hitman who discovers a new passion for acting while on a job in Los Angeles. Don't forget to check it out.